Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Bozek. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I'm super excited. It's the first night of the film sort of publicly being released. I'm equally, if probably a lot more excited that Angelika Talley is here as our guest. Having made my first film and having it be this experience and working on this thing for 3.5 years to now kind of be at this point and sitting in this place where I've watched movies for as long as this place has been opened is an incredibly great honor. And so thank you very much. And Andre, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So Andre, I've been communicating with you since we started this whole process about who's this, who's that. I didn't know half the people. You knew everybody who were in all these photographs, and then all of a sudden, of course, there was Andre here, and there's Andre dancing at Studio 54 with Polly Mellon, having a really good time, and Andre at the Met, and Andre over here, and I, even as of last week, because Andre has an amazing book coming out in May. What's it called?
Chiffon Trenches.
Yes, of course. And I was like, he said, I need some other pictures. So I was like looking at this picture and at that picture, and I found all these. I'm still finding them, and not in the film. And so, Andre, first of all, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd love for you to share with everyone your thoughts about Bill and kind of.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for doing this great film and discovering that you had this great niche, this archives of all this extraordinary material and all these photographs. And it's just amazing that you had this in your basement for all these years and you discovered it. And it's truly a work of art. And also, Mr. Cunningham, for me, was an American national treasure. I think everyone who was, thank you for that. Everyone who came in contact with Bill Cunningham on Fifth Avenue or in Paris or Milan, wherever you were, he would take your picture if you had something or looked interesting. We can see that from books. We can see that from the film. You didn't just have to be Nan Kempner dancing in Studio 54 at Donna Ross. You could just be every man.
Or with you.
Or me. You could just be anyone or everyone. And that was the greatness of Bill. He was a universal man, and he had the greatest humanity. He somehow reminded me of a Buddhist monk living in the Himalayas because he was a very disciplined human being. He ate sparingly once. I was on 7th Avenue with him, and I said, Bill, let's go to lunch. And he says, okay, well, I'll take you to lunch. He refused to go to a fancy restaurant. And we went into some little side corner place, and he ordered this is before kale juice. He ordered some green juice, and that was his lunch. And an alfalfa sprouts sandwich. And that's who Bill was. And if you would be in a black tie party, like if you could be at the Met, for the Met Ball, he would never sit down at all if he was at a black tie event taking photographs. He would be dressed in black tie. He would be appropriately dressed. He would never sit down. He would just ask for a glass of water. And he always had a big smile on his face. Sometimes in later years, he forgot your name. And he would say, hey, child, how are you doing, child?
Child? He called Iris Hepful child. She's 98.
Yes. And he says, what are you wearing, child? Child, that's great. Child, oh, you've done well. If you had on a fur coat. He said, oh my God, look at you, you've done well. And then he'd come to me and say, oh, child, who is that young lady over there? And you'd give the name. And he said, oh, yes. And he was a wonderful man. And he was at the New York Times. And every Sunday when you open up the style section, you turn to the page where Bill Cunningham had worked a week on those collages. Do you remember those collages? And so people they loved him, and they loved what he represented to the world. And he captured the world in a very special way.
So, speaking of that, Ruben Toledo was here last night, and Ruben, bless his heart and bless his soul, he and Isabel were the most supportive of me at the very, very beginning of this process because they knew Bill really well. They had dinner with him every Saturday night. And they'd eat at some cheesy little diner by his Carnegie Hall place, and then he'd take him really excited in his kind of way to the newsstand, and he'd rip open the pages, and he'd say, do you like them? And they'd all sort of have this sort of this went on for years and years and years, and it was an art on the Upper East Side. That was what happened. Every socialite on Saturday night would go down, or they'd send their servants down to get the Sunday Times or the Saturday night delivery of the Sunday Times, and they'd rip open the pages,
looking for their photograph.
Yes,
hopefully.
exactly.
That you'd meet the standards of Bill Cunningham and the theme that he was promoting that week or had he photographed that week. But he was just extraordinary, man. And one had to live up to a certain standard in his presence. He lived for a while, always in the Carnegie Hall, but he slept in a room that was so small, it was his file cabinets with all the negatives of his film. He slept on a mallet or a mattress.
It was a foam rubber. It wasn't even a mattress.
It wasn't
just
even
foam.
a bed. He was like a Japanese human being. You know, when you see in those films, I don't mean, please forgive me if I've been in political. You know,
No.
They sleep on little low things on the floor and all of that. He also kept his wardrobe to a minimum. He kept a bicycle. He had these Chinese jackets. He had shirts that he hung up on those file cabinets. And he didn't have a kitchen. And at a certain time, did he not have to go across the hall to have a shower?
Oh, yeah, no. For 40 years, he shared a bathroom with everybody, including Adita Sherman. Everybody that lived on the 12th floor in Carnegie Hall, they all shared a bathroom.
He was he was a great humanitarian, and that's what I think that we must remember him for, as well as for documentation of all the people in the fashionable world. Everyone was fashionable. Everyone was a great fashion plate in Bill Cunningham's eyes. In his camera, through the lens of his camera, he documented great trends. You know, he'd do them by themes. You'd be in the blizzard snow, you'd be in the mud and slush running across Fifth Avenue, and there would be you in a big puffer coat, or there would be gay pride. He'd do the great gay pride parades. They were beautiful, no?
Incredible.
And it's just so many wonderful moments with Bill, just extraordinary.
And he was what was really cool about him, and as you sort of discovered, is that he had an incredible sense of humor. And today's Valentine's Day, right?
Yes.
So that picture of those two dogs that are having sex, that's a picture in front of that East Village chocolate shop, French chocolate shop. I can't remember what the name of it's called. I'm sure you all know what it is. And guess what? He sent that picture to Donna Jordan, who's all over the movie. She was a big model in the 60s and the 70s. And he sent that to her and wrote a big heart on the back of it and said, "Happy Valentine's Day." And sent that to her. And there's another shot of a guy who's falling on the street, a black and white. Well, he, you know, like, I'm a dad. I have an 11-year-old son. You know, and you see these YouTube videos of dads photographing, you know, kids falling on their ass on ice in front of their school, and they just post it for like hours. Well, he had an entire file of Broadway in January 1971 where Broadway froze over, and he stood there all day and took pictures of people falling on their ass and all forms of like all kind of different stuff. So he had an incredible sense of humor. It wasn't just about the eye for like what you're wearing.
He was a great sense of humor, He made you laugh. He was and when he was photographing something like at the Met Museum or some serious fashion show, say in Paris, I remember him so well in Paris and Milan. We would all be over there running around, going to the Louvre, the gardens, looking for fashion, the Galliano shows. Bill was always the same person all the time with two cameras and walking around, going on the subway. And back in the 80s, he was the same as he was before he died. He loved beauty, and he loved the discovery of the specialness about people and fashion. And he really was extraordinary, expert, and knowledgeable about fashion. Remember the magazine Details? He had a column in Details that was so sophisticated where he would define the moment of the fashion collections in Paris, and he would connect the current Japanese trends with the moment of style in the 19th century. He would have drawings or illustrations of, say, Les Incroyables, and then he would show you how that was a very big moment in the fashion world in Paris and London and Milan. He was just extraordinary.
And raise your hand if you know what Diet Prada is. Okay, so speaking of Details magazine, remember Bill would like say, well, so-and-so designer in America just knocked off that designer and knocked off that designer and knocked off. Well, he knew very, very well from going back to the 30s. If somebody was knocking somebody off, he knew.
Yes, he knew. He had a walking encyclopedia of the history of 20th and 21st century fashion. He knew that if there was a certain kind of a coat or dress that had been inspired by Charles James, or in the 40s, the 30s, he knew that if Halston in the 70s was doing a biased cut, that it went back to Vianney. He knew when Chanel was doing gypsies, he would connect it to the gypsy influence of Chanel in the 30s when she was doing gypsy collections or gypsy-inspired clothes right before the war, 39. And so he just was a great expert. He had a great body of knowledge, and he was very, very passionate about fashion. You do realize that when he left the army, he went and designed hats for famous people like, who was the famous customer?
Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe. Who
didn't have any style.
And none, and society ladies. And all the society ladies were running up to his hats. And he was working at that famous place
Shane on.
Yeah. And then he got a job at Women's Wear Daily, which was the Bible of the fashion world, the Daily. And he left because they tampered with his text, and he did not like that. No. He had high standards. Don't mess with his text. And he didn't like it, and he left. And look, the doors opened for him, and he went to the New York Times.
Exactly. And, you know, he did that for 39 years. That Greta Garbo thing kind of started it in 1978 when they that picture when you didn't see her, you just saw a Nutria coat, which you knew what it was. I know what it is now. I had no idea what a Nutria coat, a beaver coat or something like that. Whatever. I didn't know. And Shane, you know, and I so botched the pronunciation of it in that interview in 1994 that I cut it out of the film because I was like, Schwan Wanui or something like that. But those women, talk about Diet Prada, those women that he met in 1951 when he was in the Army. I mean, who goes on a leave from the Army and they go to the couture shows and he's making hats for them? But those women really were an incredible influence on Bill. But they were the knockoff artists of all. They'd go to the couture shows, they'd buy a Balenciaga dress so they could get invited back every year. Then they'd go sketch the rest of it, go to Milan, buy the fabric, then they'd go to New York and open this shop and make clothes for the Rockefellers and the Reitzmans and the Astors, and they'd put their labels in them and sell them as sort of what they were. And
listen, that was a moment when people did that kind of thing, and he was right in the middle of the whole moment of high fashion at that time when they were knocking off French clothes in New York, and these society ladies got their clothes at Chez Ninon. I think Chez Ninon, the girls were tough, you say. I think in his book, did he talk about them?
He talked about them, yes. And
how tough they were.
They were tough. And Elizabeth Stewart, who was Jackie's fit model, is kind of a bunch of pictures in there, and I talked to her. She's older now, and she said they were the biggest con artists in the business at the time. She said that, quote unquote. I didn't say that. She did, because they would do it. They'd have Balenciaga. I found them in the archive. The labels from Balenciaga, the labels from here, and the labels from there. And Jackie at the time, if you remember, Jackie Kennedy, it was a big deal that she shouldn't buy French clothing. Yeah. And so they would remake these clothing.
And she loved French clothing. Yeah. She loved French. You know, the suit that she wore when JFK was assassinated was a Chez Ninon. The Chez Ninon interpretation of a pink Chanel suit. That was a Chanel copy, but it was a Chez Ninon, that iconic suit with the dried blood on it, right?
Yes,
correct?
indeed.
Yes.
And so if you go to wmagazine.com, yesterday they printed a story. It's not in the movie because you have to get permission for all these things, but I got permission to give them this thing. Well, in that story that was written about the film and is the receipt that was in the archive. It's the receipt of the pink dress that Jackie had and the swatch from the pink dress that she bought in 1960, and it was $460. And in this archive, he saved everything. I mean, they were closing Chez Ninon, and he heard about it after the women had died and somebody took it over, and he went to the dumpster with his bike and just took files and files of all these things and letters from Jackie Kennedy that are just amazing.
And then when he had to get out of the Carnegie Hall, he reluctantly moved to some luxury high-rise modernistic apartment that overlooked Central Park. And I think I must have one note from him, but he reluctantly removed to this apartment with this modern kitchen, and he used the modern kitchen for the files, you know?
Exactly.
He didn't cook. Who cares about cooking anyway?
Yes, exactly.
Grubhub.
Any questions from anybody? I'd love to hear if anybody. I'm sure.
Who cares about cooking?
Exactly. She said. So, lastly, before we take Iris Apfel, I spoke to her. I haven't met her, but we're going to do something in Palm Beach in a month. And she's 98 years old, right? And she was in the first movie. She's incredible. You know. She's incredible. And she said, Bill says, I'm never going to retire. I live in Palm Beach sometimes, and all these men who make all this money, they come down here and they go to these dances for diseases. And she said, they're failing. She said, I invited Bill to dinner one time, and he said yes. But she said, I made 34 reservations, and he said no to every single one of them, because he wouldn't go be seen in any of these places. And so she called the Times and said, where does he eat? And he said, well, the cafeteria. So she had him over to dinner at her place, and he got there at 7 and stayed till like 3 o'clock in the morning and just talked forever. So questions, please.
Good evening. I'm wondering, Mr. Talley, if you have any memory that you could share with us about Mr. Cunningham that involves Mrs. Diana Vreeland.
Mr. Cunningham was very respectful of Mrs. Vreeland. And I remember when I was a volunteer at the Met in 1974, he was up there almost every day documenting the process of putting that show on called Romantic in Hollywood and Glamorous Design. Yet, somehow in the real life autobiography of Deanna Vreeland, he was doubtful of her provenance because she said, I was born somewhere, maybe Paris, and then I went to ride ponies with Buffalo Bill or Wild Bill Cody or something. And then he was very doubtful about all of that. He really did question that because Mrs. Vreeland was known to embroider and enlarge her own resume. And then when Mrs. Vreeland died, Vogue sent me at great expense to London to meet her sister. Her sister was married and lived in a very big house with a very beautiful garden by some famous gardener. Don't forget the name. But she was the opposite of Mrs. Vreeland. And so they sent me there to look at the albums and the photographs she had. And everything Mrs. Vreeland had said about, I learned to ride ponies with Wild Bill Cody or Buffalo Bill or all that sort of thing. It was true. There were photographs. And there were photographs of her with Wild Bill Cody and stuff. And I brought them back to Vogue, and we kept them in the vaults for months and months to run a story we did when she died. So he was very questionable about her, but he totally admired her. And he loved what she did at the museum, and he loved the creativity of it and the originality of it. And he was very respectful, and Mrs. Vreeland, those ladies loved him. Nan Kempner loved him. There's a picture of me and Nan Kempner dancing at 54. They wanted to be photographed by Bill. They waited, and as Anna Wintour says, we always dressed for Bill, because they knew they were going to be photographed.
So Andre, in the text, in the audio, in the film, where it's you and Diane talking and who changed the mannequins? It wasn't me. Who did change the mannequins?
Well, I can't say. I don't remember, but I know that the mannequins were changed, and I was going to tell Mrs. Vreeland I didn't do it. I love that voice.
Yeah, and he. I mean. When he says, I photographed every time her hand touched a mannequin, for a year and a half, I didn't have access to the archive. Mm-hmm. So I just kept saying, God, one day I'm going to find the picture of her wrapping an Hermes scarf around a mannequin's head, and I never did it. And then when I finally got access to the archive, that was the first picture that I found. I wanted to find that picture because it's sort of like he has this incredible narrative that I'd been living with, and suddenly I had access to every one of those kinds of pictures, and it was just, and then the audio, that audio you heard, there's tapes and tapes and tapes and tapes.
Me
That's another
talking
movie
with
oh my God, he taped everything.
Make a movie, please.
It was a cheap little tape, but you can just hear her and phone conversations.
And Mrs. Vreeland spoke. Oh, I said, Andre, very Sonata-like.
Yes, exactly.
Very Sonata. Another question.
Second only to Andre's, not unknown voice as well. Another question.
In the documentary, it's made very clear that Bill Cunningham loathed attention, and for a creative in today's day and age of social media, whether you're a photographer, a designer, or a filmmaker, do you think it's possible to achieve the same level of success and recognition that Bill did without playing the fame game?
He was Nostradamus, not just about fashion. He was Nostradamus about society and where technology was going. He did an interview with Fern Malice 2 years before he died at the 92nd Street Y, which Fern just reposted today on her Instagram account. And he said he was 87 or 85 years old, and he said, and he was half deaf, but of course he had his blue jacket on. And she said, well, what about cell phones, Bill? And what about all this? And what about all that? And he goes, I don't have a cell phone. I'm an old hag. What do I need a cell phone for? And I'm never going to use the damn thing. He said, but technology is changing everything we're doing. He said the designers have to design with the inside of their minds now and not the outside of their minds. And fashion's going to end on its own. And then he said, look at the lines on 5th Avenue and 58th Street at that Apple store. Do you see lines coming out of Bergdorf Goodman? Do you see lines coming out of Saks Fifth Avenue? And that's where he saw it. But he would have embraced this. He wouldn't be going around taking pictures with a cell phone. He'd still have his cameras, and eventually he got digital at the New York Times. But he would not have besmirched this. And you see all these guys like Bryant and all these sort of Instagram guys that have all these followers. Absolutely, bring it on in terms of that. But you're going to find somebody who's going to eat a cheese sandwich and live on a foam mattress in the Carnegie Hall and share a bathroom with everybody on the 12th floor, ain't no way you're going to find somebody like that.
No.
My question is, for individuals like you, Andre, that have such a long history connected to a particular thing, and Bill had such a long history connected to documenting fashion, and you had a long history in fashion, what is it about individuals like him, individuals like you, that have been able to navigate these long careers? How do you navigate these kind of lives in that type of environment.
The reason that people like Bill Cunningham and myself have survived so many decades and decades in this incredible magical world of fashion and history, fashion history and style. It wasn't only just about a dress. Bill Cunningham knew about the history of style. He knew what style meant in certain decades and how it evolved. And you do this because you can only do this and survive if you are authentic, if you are your authentic self. I say this, authenticity is the key to everything. If you can project your authentic self, you will make it and you will survive. That's how I have survived. I am 71 years old. I started in fashion in 1974. I came from Brown University, and I started with Mrs. Vreeland in 1974. And I started as a volunteer. I listened to her. I owe her very much for my career, and I kept going to the top. I worked with Andy Warhol, but they saw in me something authentic, the authentic self. Isabel Toledo, the late great designer who dressed Michelle Obama for her first inaugural coat and dress in lemongrass lace, was authentic, an authentic self-made creator. She created beautiful dresses. She was self-made and self-taught, and she collaborated with her husband, Ruben Toledo, the great artist. They are two great examples of authenticity. Yves Saint Laurent, whom Mr. Cunningham greatly admired, there was something that made him authentic. Everything about him was authentic. It wasn't like he was just copying something that came before him. Maybe he did copy Dior, or was inspired by Dior, but it was authentic. He brought something authentic to the world of fashion. So you can get by and be successful being authentic.
No
Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't come without scar tissue, by the way.
Oh, totally, totally.
Having just spent 3.5 years making this movie and doing all of that, there's a little bit of scar tissue involved in the process, but that's what builds character, I think.
Yes,
and
yes.
the survival of if you can get past that, because it's not always easy. And he would tell you that, and Isabel and Ruben would definitely tell you that.
And Deanna Vreeland would tell you that, too.
Exactly right.
This lady wants to ask a question.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
How did you decide what to include and what to not include from his oeuvre of photography? I didn't notice any famous or not famous people from the literary community, and I was wondering if they're just not people that he photographed because they weren't high fashion.
That's a great question, and I think that he saw the clothes first, and so there are people like there's some, and I debated for a long time about should I identify that was Robert Kennedy in 1968, or should I identify that was Henry Kissinger, or Andre Leon Talley carrying a mannequin down the steps in 1975. I don't know if you noticed that, but that was him carrying the mannequin with in the Diana Vreeland thing in 1975 or 1974, but I really didn't want to do it overly so. There were some obvious ones like Jackie Kennedy and Anna Wintour, etc. But beyond that, I wanted it to be more about this whole documentation of the history of New York, and not saying, oh, there's a famous person, and if you look, you watch it a couple of times, you'll see there's Barbra Streisand and Boy George and Joan Rivers, but I didn't do that intentionally for that. You're making a movie. You want a lot of people to see it and all that, but it was more about he spent so much time every week choosing 1-inch little pictures, and he pissed off endless art directors at the New York Times that refused to ever work with him again because he was like, I'm doing it. And guess what? He got his way. Particularly years he got his way. And so I wanted, in my own way, as an artist making a film, I wanted to choosing those 512 pictures out of the 3 million that were in the archive and the 25,000 that I scanned in my dining room on Long Island. I wanted to make sure that I chose, and I spent the most time on this of the film of choosing every single one of those pictures in that kind of way. It's sort of I guess an homage to Bill, but it was really more about the documentation of it, and not so much about famous people. But seeing Norman Mailer come down nude, I would imagine would have been a pretty funny thing at Carnegie Hall in 1950s.
First off, amazing movie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And this woman spoke about social media and Instagram. I'm wondering what is going to happen with the 3 million images. How can we look at Bill Cunningham's archives in the future?
Well, Mark can continue to make another film about it, as well as the estate. Is it the niece who owns the estate?
Yes, indeed. Trish.
They can do books. You can have books. You can do books. You can pick the themes. You can extract the things that he did. They can be categorized, and there's always going to be another way to do it. And I think it's very important that films are made and books are done, more than just Instagram and Twitter. It's very important, books.
However,
and films. Oh, God, crap. Thank you, darling. Thank you.
However, Instagram is still a big deal, right? And so to your question, B. Cunningham Film is what our Instagram account is. And you asked about the archive, and having spent 3.5 years now living this whole process, if this movie does really well, I'm going to buy the damn archive. And I'm going to do it justice in a way that if Bill wanted this archive to be in the Met, if he wanted it at the New York Public Library, he would have willed it to them. He did not will it to them. He willed it to his niece, a bartender in Boston that New York society treated like shit when this all happened.
When he passed away?
Yes, bad. So never mind. This is all there's always drama behind all of these kinds of things. But if he wanted that to happen, he would have done it. That's what he would have done. He didn't do that. He did not do that. Isabel Stewart Gardner is a incredible museum up in Boston that his father took him when he was 7 years old. He went there forever for the rest of his life. He photographed it in the Times. Here was this incredibly wealthy woman who bought Degas and Rembrandt, but she was a hoarder. And she had like pieces of Nathaniel Hawthorne's hair in a tube and Picasso's paintbrushes. And then she had her husband, instead of donating it to museums, she had her husband build a mansion around her art.
And it became the museum.
And
And that's a spooky museum, too.
It's a little spooky because you can't change anything. If you move one picture from this wall to the other wall, she put it in her will. So when I saw the museum for the first time in my life 3 days before I got in the archive. I woke up 4 days later after the archive. I said, aha, this is why Bill loved this place. He did not want it to be a wing anywhere. He wanted his own place. And it'll take its course. Who knows if I'm going to buy the damn thing? I would love to. But it'll take its own sort of course, but it will be sold as a whole. And his niece is ruthlessly protective, and God bless her. I showed her my film in a Holiday Inn before I had access to the archive, over 3 glasses of cheap Holiday wine. Opened the laptop, I played it for her. She was weeping hysterically at the end, and that's how she gave me access to the archive. So nobody's ever going to touch Trish Simonson in my book, because Irish Catholic Bill Cunningham has got it in the sort of DNA of that family. So I'm wildly grateful to her. I first of all, two other things. The Gospel According to Andre, Kate Novak, who made that movie, is a phenomenal movie. And look, Andre, like Diana Vreeland and Bill, were like big sort of characters. That movie could have been so over the top, and it is done with such beautiful subtlety. That is incredible. And the name of your book in May is?
Chiffon Trenches.
And who's publishing it?
Penguin, Valentine.
Yes.
April 28th, pre-ordered on Amazon. Thank you for the plug. And it's a book.
It's a book. And don't put it on your coffee table. Nobody has coffee tables anymore.
Oh, he forgot about a fragrance.
You have a fragrance?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know. What's it called?
It's called Moire Noir, which means black silk.
Awesome.
And you can buy it e-commerce. You can look up on Secret Edge Beauty. Look online, Edge Beauty. Look on the website, Edge Beauty, and you can buy it online.
And what's it called again?
Moire Noir, which means black silk.
Love it. So
it's not like, what's
it's not like fuck you, Tom Ford, or whatever his fragrance is called, or something like that.
It is Moire Noir.
He has one called Fuck You, I think.
He has Fuck You?
Yes,
No, he's fucking fabulous. Fucking fabulous.
That's it. That's fucking fabulous.
Thank you, and thank you, Mark, for this great film. And it's a great cultural. Before I sit down, please. It is a great cultural moment, this film, because it's a great cultural icon, Bill Cunningham. And thank you all for coming out and loving this film. And it's a very beautiful audience, particularly you because you love books.
Touche. Thank you. God bless. Thank you.